as well. Exciting to have another event going on. I'm going to speak just for a minute or two while people slowly register and check in. It's not often that I get to have an old roommate as a speaker. So very excited to have Jules agreeing to go ahead and moderate a conversation, a topic that's very important, very timely. I think you're going to hear from a great panel that everyone has going to appreciate a bit of a different perspective that Jules pulled together. Francis, I think we met at one of these events, actually, a YU event. So good to see you again. And Gal, good to meet you. And Anne is going to be joining hopefully momentarily. Just housekeeping for people, everyone's on mute. And if you have questions, just put it into the chat box and hopefully we'll be able to field your questions. YU, the professional network, we've been doing these for many years now. We've been in webinar format since after Pesach, and now we're up to Purim, so it's pretty amazing. I think over that time frame, we've done 25, 26 or so of these. So hopefully you'll all continue to be a part of it. We're thrilled to have this one be a joint effort of the YU Technology Group, rapidly growing in the YU Legal Group. We have a YU Wall Street Group and a YU Marketing Group coming up next. So excited about that as well. I want to point out how timely it is that this particular event is happening right now. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. I just pulled up a quote that the UN Secretary General just did 2 days ago while he was opening up the Human Rights Council. I'm not going to get into politics about the UN or the Human Rights Council, but I think this quote, I'll read it out loud and then hand this the topic over to Jules. But you'll see here, a vast library of information is being assembled about each of us, yet we don't really have the keys to that library. We don't know how this information has been collected, by whom, or for what purposes. And then he goes on to go ahead and talk about the problems that this is creating. Our data is being used to shape and manipulate our perceptions without our ever realizing it. Governments can exploit that data to control the behavior of their citizens. This requires a serious discussion. And hopefully that's the discussion that we're going to have today. I think it's certainly been timely for a while now since Facebook and other people have started using the data. And we have the industry experts to go ahead and really delve into this issue more than just a high level. Yes, it's important to discuss how are different people approaching this. So I'm very excited to hear from the experts. Please, everybody, if you have questions, just put them into the chat box and we will try to go ahead and field as many as possible. Jules, hand it off to you.
Hey, everybody. And we have a small and intimate crowd, so we look forward to having you all jump in, just raise your hand or put something in the comments. Super excited to have a intersection of professional and personal. Not only was Lawrence a roommate of mine, Maury, I think we were roommates in many ways and shapes and forms. And so great to see a lot of old friends. And also a nice opportunity to connect with some old professional friends. Anne and I have never been roommates, I promise, but have probably been in the same conference, hotel, panel, meeting for more years than either of us will admit, from her early days leading privacy at Yahoo to Google Plus to Slack, and now the role she plays as the head of trust and ethics at Alexa, Amazon's. I'll let you describe more, and it's more than simply that little smart speaker. It's an awful lot more, and I'll let Anne tell us a little bit more about it. So thanks for joining us, Anne, and great to see you. A newer friend, Gal, where are you, Gal? There he is. Minor is one of the, Gal Ringel is one of the exciting leaders of a new area of startups. We all know of Israel as a great hotbed of startups, and we all presumably understand what a powerhouse Israel is in cybersecurity, people may not be aware that Israel has become a hotbed of startup privacy-related technologies, very different, sometimes compatible with security, sometimes the opponent of security. Companies are starting to launch. Gals has been one of the more exciting ones. I'll let him describe a little bit more, but a fast-growing and interesting company that helps consumers exercise the new rights that people are starting to get with European law, with state laws, maybe eventually with a new federal law. Super delighted to have met Francis as part of this panel. Francis has been working for many years on a range of issues around biometrics, from facial recognition to other technologies, and really looking forward to hearing a bit more about her work. So here's how I'm going to cue it up, both to let our folks give us a little bit of kind of where they're coming to, as well as perhaps the question that Lawrence set up with his description of all the data that's being collected. Do we actually have, is this, why are we having a panel on privacy? Isn't it all gone? Have we lost all privacy and all sense of having any restrictions on our data when we have facial recognition, when we have smart home devices, when our phones collect such a wide range of data? How do any of our speakers who are all working in this space see their roles in reclaiming, balancing, figuring this out? So before I hand over perhaps first to Anne to kick us off, since this is a YU event, although we have a diverse audience, we gotta at least note that all privacy, actually the earliest source, one of the earliest sources for privacy comes from where? The Bible. Comes from the famous story of the king who wanted to curse the Jews to ensure he would, prevail in battle, and hired a prophet who was ready to hurl his toughest curse, the story of Balak and Bilam. And of course, famously, when the prophet ascends to the mountain and is ready to see the Jews camped and to give his nastiest blast, which evidently was typically a very effective blessing or curse. And instead of a curse, what comes out of his mouth? The famous words that are part of the morning prayer for many, Ma tovu ahalecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. How beautiful are the tents of Israel? How beautiful are, what is so beautiful about the tents? Asked the commentaries. What was he looking at the tents, and what was this? Oh, how beautiful are the tents of Israel? How beautiful are these tents? And the commentaries say he saw that the tents were set up so that the entrances didn't face one another. And so when you came out of your tent, you didn't accidentally or intentionally snoop into your neighbor's tent and see their private business. And although this seems like a soft and cute story, it's actually the source of lots of the Talmudic legal law around privacy and when you can block up things and what rights you have and what damages you can have. So perhaps a very fitting and appropriate topic. And with that setup, Anne may have heard me sing. I told this to Dvar Torah many years ago in Israel, in an OECD meeting with delegates from all over the world. And somehow I was compelled to sing for them Ma Tovu, just to illustrate it. It was a very bad idea. Were you there, Anne, at that?
Yes, I was there.
And it was a bad idea, right?
I think you owe me $1 because I've heard this. I've heard about the tents probably 10 or 20 times in speaking engagements we've done together. So I had a prediction that you were going to do it, but I also predicted that you would show up as a cat, and you did not. So so there we are. But I'm happy to start in talking about, is privacy dead? Do people care about it? And I would say that judging by the number of people that joined Signal and Telegram and that showed up for me in the past month or two, that people actually really do still care about this issue. People are responsive. And I think that to me, I take that as a sign that we're doing something right in explaining to people what some of these trade-offs are, and people are reacting. Let me tell you a little bit first about my job, because I work for Amazon. Amazon is a vast organization. I work within the Alexa org specifically. I'm the director of Alexa Trust. The organization that I work for actually is one of the interesting things about Alexa. It is not, there's the Echo device and then there's the Alexa service. And so Alexa is the smart service. The Echo device is the is the actual physical hardware. And so, you know, I spent a long time working in a space where we were thinking about how do you add privacy? The internet was not built for privacy. We added privacy to the internet. But it is interesting to work with startups, with smaller companies, and with products like Alexa that were conceived in a privacy-aware world. So much of the original engineering of a product like this, because we understood if you're going to put a speaker in your house that's listening, you might be concerned about what that speaker is hearing, or what the microphone is picking up. So a lot of the very specific engineering choices that were made when the product was developed were actually made with privacy in mind, whether it's a visual indicator, the transparency pieces. A lot of friction was added to the experience in order to give people assurance about privacy. And so it's been really interesting also to work with startups and other companies that have been born in an era where GDPR was already, before it became law, it was understood to be on the horizon. So watching organizations build functionality into their services about not just how to input massive amounts of data, but how to make sure that you can extract it and give it back to customers. Those kinds of changes have been game changing. I think, and to me, I think is an indication that nothing is static in this space. There is evolution, there is development, there is, I would say, hope for the future. Actually, it is not a hopeless situation that we're in with respect to privacy. So I will pass it off to others to get your point of view on that.
So Gal, is your startup in your technology going to solve the challenge that many people feel, in that they don't know where their data is, they don't know how to get it, they don't know what rights they have? How are you going to solve this and hopefully make money and make your investors money doing it as well? Is privacy going to be as big a business market? This is a joint event with the Wall Street group. So some of them maybe are here because they care about privacy, and others perhaps are looking for the next big investment. Is privacy going to be as big as cybersecurity? And is this Israel's next big new sector?
So as the company CEO, I have to be optimistic. So the simple answer is yes, of course. Just to rewind a little bit about my background. So I mainly come from cybersecurity offensive background. I spent almost a decade in the 8200 unit, which is the equivalent of the NSA and the MI5 in the UK. And I think that we got the idea to start mine after we realized that although that we come from cybersecurity offensive, we felt that it's crazy that we lost control over our data, and that we have no idea which companies have collected what about us. And as Anne said, you all know the phrase privacy is dead. And I think it's true, because I'll explain why. The way the internet is structured led to the fact that companies have the power to dictating the data terms, right? And we all have to click I agree. And we have nothing to do about it, because we want to consume the services and enjoy the internet because the internet is an amazing place, right? But although consumers want privacy on one hand, on the other hand, they do want to share their data and being able to purchase product online, to book hotels, to purchase flight tickets, etc. Now, I think that the problem with privacy is what companies are doing with the data they receive. So I suggest another way to think about privacy. And in today's world, it's all about cost versus value. And what do I mean by that? Each time that we have a digital relationship with the company, we pay without data, right? This is the cost. And then we receive some value in return. And each time that the value is greater than the cost, we have no problem with that, right? But that changes over time. And most services have a hard time providing a better service without our data. So I think that in most cases, data can generate a better service. So I think it's all about how companies are dealing and respecting our data, and how we as consumers are keeping sure that we leave our data only where we actually need. And this is what my company does. In 30 seconds, we can show you your digital footprint, which means all the companies that have collected your data in the past, but also to explain what are the digital risks that are associated with that relationship. And as Jules said, since regulation is very complex and hard for the average person, we allow anyone to exercise the right to be forgotten and we will help him go through that process until completion.
Francis, you've been working in areas ranging from facial recognition and other areas of biometrics. In some ways, some consider these technologies, although the great convenience of, our finger to get into our phone, our face to unlock our laptop. But we've already become a little bit concerned that every website we go to and every app we use has a lot of information. But at least if I walk outside and people don't know me, I'm anonymous. But yet concerns about faces being recognized if you're at a rally in countries around the world where there are totalitarian governments. I can't hide, I can opt out, I can delete cookies. I can't easily, change my face, change my voice print, change my fingerprints. There may be a security value, but tell us, is biometrics really going to be the end of the line for users, or is there a privacy-friendly way to get the utility of biometrics, the security, the convenience, without forever being lost?
Thanks, Jules. So the world of biometrics just regards privacy is actually very interesting. There are two sides to look at it. So one is the public, let's say, surveillance aspect of it. And the other side, which is what I'm currently focused very much on, is the actual protection of the biometric data itself. I'll start with the second and then we'll go to the first. So one of the most attractive parts of biometrics when you do business, and let's just kind of lay it down, right? When you're doing business, it requires trust with the person you're doing business with. And that trust is established by knowing who you're actually doing business with to validate that identity. So that's where the biometric becomes really attractive, especially in a remote world, because you can use these technologies to verify that somebody is who they claim to be, even if they're not standing in front of you or if you've not known them for years on end. So it's very attractive, right? Biometrics don't change. They're really the only way to link a person to their identity, and so they're irrefutable in that regard. The most scary part about all of this is, what if somebody actually gets their hands on your biometric? That was always, I've been doing this for more than 20 years. And that was always in the back of everybody's mind, like, how do you actually protect the biometric itself, especially as more and more of this gets used? And it's not a hypothetical question. 5 years ago, the government, US government, employee database was hacked, and anybody who had any clearances or any background check with the federal government had their fingerprints stolen. These fingerprints are now going all over the place. I think, I believe it was a nation state actor that did that stealing. But there's nobody, I mean, even till today, that doesn't feel the fear and the consequence of that. Just last week, the California DMV was hacked with everybody's pictures. So these are not hypothetical questions. So what I'm focusing on right now is, how do you protect biometric data in a way that it could still be used to identify people without having them be accessed and available for hackers and fraudsters to actually steal. So the question that we're answering now is, instead of storing data in central honeypots that are, again, vulnerable, or relying on other ways of identifying people that can be circumvented, what if we created a new next generation architecture that was completely decentralizing all of this information so that people's privacy from that respect was protected? So that's the first.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that answers the first element of biometric data protection. The second question that you asked was, okay, now the use of it in public places. So this is actually something I got death threats over back in, I don't know, 2000 or January 2001. There was an event called the Snooper Bowl, which was the first time facial recognition was used in a public place. I don't know if anybody was around or remembers any of that, but that event caused me death threats. And basically, the issue there was that facial recognition was in use without any notification. Nobody even knew that it was used, who was in the database or anything like that. At the time, the biometric industry actually put together a code of conduct which I have to say is really, it really upsets me that it hasn't taken off. Although in the last few months, we're starting to see more responsible use guidelines around this technology, and all of them go back to what we called 20 years ago. Number one, signage in public places that the technology is in use. Number two, no match, no memory. If you're not in the database, the system doesn't know who you are. And number three, that the entity that is collecting the information should not use that information for any other purpose other than what it was designed for, unless the user had consent. We see now those principles there was a law in Texas that was passed back then. That was the first one. We see now New York, Virginia adopting these kinds of regulations. And it's my hope that that this becomes, standard. I should just say one more thing about this, is that there was a Supreme Court ruling in 1972 that did say that if you go and show your face in public, you do lose that assumption of privacy. So if you are showing yourself to the world and somebody can recognize you, then you've kind of gone out there. If you put a mask on, I guess that's a different story. But just generally walking around, that's already been established by the Supreme Court.
So I think you show perhaps some of the challenges of regulating, right? Knowledge. I see you outside. Can the law say that I have to forget, or I don't know that that information? Obviously, in Europe and elsewhere, the regulatory structures have permitted courts to say no. Businesses or government don't automatically get to assume that you are public because you're public, and it could be that the courts are starting to get a little tighter on this. We have a more recent Supreme Court decision that said, yeah, I guess your phone pings towers, and I guess that you're sharing information with third parties because your phone is pinging all these towers. But the ubiquity of being able to track you in such a fulsome way actually does, at least on the government side, perhaps require some legal process, as opposed to, sorry, you gave the data away. So just for the folks who don't live in the world of privacy full time, we have this notion called the third party doctrine, right? Where the Constitution protects things that are in your home, your letters, right? Your personal effects. But when you put stuff in someone else's, I send you the letter, I put money in a bank, I understand that it is somewhere else, and therefore the same constitutional privacy limits, at least against the government, don't apply. Today, clearly doesn't make sense, right? My email might have been sitting on my computer, but obviously almost everything sits on someone else's server. So have I actually given up all privacy? So it'll be interesting to see whether the court gives us some protection. Let me ask you all this, and we'll maybe bat these around sort of quickly. There's a lot of regulation coming down the line. State after state. Virginia is about to pass a broad consumer privacy law. Washington is near. California just has. New York has just introduced a very significant one. Is the court, is legislation going to really change, things for consumers or change things for business? Some think we're heading, your banking data and your health data. Obviously, we know these have strong legal protections in a way that perhaps just generally going to a website or your consumer data doesn't. Is data becoming a heavier regulated, area that is going to create business challenges, that is really maybe going to make life better or more inconvenient, but give more protections to consumers? Or is technology going to save the day? Are companies like Gals, and let me go to you, Alexa in some ways was designed with some technical structures that try to answer some of the questions. Are you optimistic that technology is going to provide the solution? Regulation, both?
Well, I think it's going to be a combination of things. The one thing I will say about regulation that I think has been net positive, having worked with companies of different sizes, very often very large companies have robust data governance organizations that actually work with compliance functions to understand, are we actually complying with the policies that we've written? Other companies, maybe not as rigorous, but I think privacy legislation has definitely stepped up what a data governance function in many organizations that probably would have waited a lot longer to have gotten to that level of sophistication. So I think that that's actually been a net positive. And there are lots of companies who are getting lots of financing right now in that space of helping all companies manage compliance, because it turns out that's a fairly sophisticated problem that many companies have. So I think there's that piece of it. But I also do think that there is an incredible amount of pressure around data minimization and to do less with more. So there are conversations that are happening, for example, on, well, how much processing and storage can we or should we do on device versus in the cloud, right? So if it's sensitive, should we keep it on this particular device that sits inside your house? And there are interesting legal implications about whether it's in the cloud and who can access it versus whether it's on a device. Maybe that device is in your pocket. Maybe you're crossing a border. Maybe it's not so great to have all that sensitive information on your person, or maybe it is better. So there are different trade-offs in that. But I do see a lot of conversations, particularly in AI and machine learning, around what does differential privacy look like? What does federated learning look like? How can we reduce our reliance on big data, minimize the amount of actual personally identifiable data that we have, and still get to the optimal outcome? Ultimately, regulation and legislation create constraints, and constraints help drive innovation. So I do think that that's been a positive outcome of this series of conversations.
And can you also maybe share something which I think is like very basic but super important to people who maybe have Siri or Google Home or the Echo? People seem to think, if they're not deeply embedded in this debate, that these devices are listening to them because you speak and they respond. Each company has a nuance of difference, but they all have generally structured in a way that tries to prevent them from actually listening. Do you want to maybe just give a little bit of kind of a deeper understanding so people understand, what it means to be listening for a wake word, but not actually listening?
I think the number of times I have heard people say, I was talking about a new pair of Nike trainers, and then I saw an ad for those trainers on Instagram or Facebook or on Google. And I think, gosh, it would be amazing if we were that smart, I suppose. But effectively, every piece of hardware has a very small device buffer. Think of it like a answering machine back in the old days that actually had a tape that would be recorded over and over and over again. And it's a very, very, very short window. So what we're listening for is a very specific pattern. Every company has a different wake word, whether it's, hey, Google, hey, Siri, or Alexa. We actually allow you to say Alexa, Amazon computer, whichever one you want. That is what activates, effectively, that's what activates the device. So that little buffer is being written over and over and over again, looking for that wake word. You'll actually see a visual cue on an Echo device. The ring will turn blue, which lets you know at that point we are streaming that data to the cloud. And until that point, we are not active. So every company has a different way of dealing with it, but it's not possible on device actually for us to be recording everything that you are saying. And the added layer to that is that we also add, we actually have a great deal of transparency to actually show you what you have said and allow you to delete it, access it, et cetera, after the fact. So thank you for that. It's just a common misunderstanding about the way the technology works. And it is, I think, an example of privacy by design to really bake into the device some protections to ensure that ubiquitous recording is in fact not happening.
So, Gal, as a business, is privacy actually, so Anne mentioned that there are companies that are really supporting the Amazons, the Microsofts, the banks, the retailers, right, who have teams, staff, technology, because it's become big and it's complicated and it's regulatory and you really need systems. And so there's a class of companies that are sort of focused on being, B2B companies, helping provide privacy tools for companies to act properly. There's another class of companies which maybe you are more in, although I think you've told me you kind of maybe have a footprint in both, that are really helping consumers exercise their rights and so on and so forth. Over time, I've been a skeptic. People always come to me since I've been doing this a long time and say, I got a great idea. And I'm like, how are you going to pay for it? They're like, oh, well, people care about privacy. We do surveys. They say they care a great deal. So, you know, we'll charge. And it's been really hard to get anybody to pay for privacy, right? And then the other alternative is, oh, we'll have ads, which end up creating their own privacy problems with cookies and tracking. And so, you know, how can you be a privacy company if you're making money by tracking your users? That doesn't seem to stop some of the companies who do that. Are people going to pay? Most people don't. Everyone here probably cares. You cared enough to spend your lunch hour or so forth here. You care about privacy, but I warrant that many of you are not paying for any of the tools out there. Are people going to pay for privacy? Do you know from your research that they're finally ready to spend a little bit of money on this?
So definitely, yes. I can share some of our internal tests that we have done. So in just 12 months of operations, since we launched our consumer product, we grew to 160,000 users globally, completely organically. So we haven't done any acquisition efforts. Obviously, we're not going to use pixels and do all kind of retargeting. But these users have sent more than 2 million deletion requests to date, which I think this answers your question whether regulations are can help do the job. So I think regulations alone can't do the job, and companies and consumers should play along together. As Anne said, I think that companies should invest a lot of time and efforts in security and how they treat data, but also around data retention. I don't think that companies should keep data if the user is not active anymore to a certain time of period. They don't have any value on that. And going back to your question, we did tests and we know that we can charge anywhere between $3 to $5 a month. Now, how do I know that? One of our unique values that we bring with Mine is not just exercising your right to be forgotten. We help you avoid data breaches. And how do we do that? As long as you use our service and remove your data from all the unnecessary places that doesn't provide you with any value anymore. And by the way, you would be surprised to know that 80% of the companies that hold your data as we speak were due to a one-time off interaction, meaning you purchased a flight ticket a long time ago, you visited an hotel a long time ago, and these companies have sensitive information like passport and financial information. Now, what we do is that each time that you deleted an account and that process was completed successfully, we measure whether that company got breached a week, a day, a month, a few months after. And today I can proudly say that we saved more than 25,000 users from a data breach because they used our product to delete a service before it got breached. Now, if you go back to the US, I'm sure you know that the next statistic is that 1 out of 4 Americans get into identity theft at least once in his life. Now, would you pay for a service that can help you reduce the chances of experience identity theft, reputation damage, financial loss, manipulation, and all kinds of different digital risks? So we can actually do that without putting fear into the consumer faces. We would just help you manage your data like you manage your passport, like you manage your mobile phone, etc.
And Gal, what's your experience when you reach out to companies? Consumer Reports recently did a study where they arranged for consumers to make requests as they are entitled to under the California law. And they found that a lot of companies were not very responsive when the request was made via Consumer Reports facilitating this, as they are legally entitled to do, and as you are legally entitled to do as people's representative sort of under the California law. Are you finding that when you communicate, companies ignore? Are they responding? Are they actually providing all the data that the law requires? What's been your experience?
So this is really interesting. We just launched 3 weeks ago a project we call Privacy in Action. And basically we took the 2 million deletion requests that we have sent so far, and we analyzed the communication between the user and the company in terms of that process. And I must say that now we put all the data out there in real time, so you can see how companies are putting their privacy policy and words into action. So you can see exactly on different companies, how do they process privacy requests, how do they handle that, how fast do they do that, which companies actually ignores. Now, that really differs from different geographies. So in Europe, if you think about the GDPR, since the GDPR is already almost 3 years in, so companies are more prepared for the GDPR. So in Europe, we see a really high completion rates, almost 80%. But if you look at CCPA, since it's actually still fairly new, many companies are still yet compliant. And on the other end, I think that one of the problems with the CCPA is that the fines are much lower than the GDPR. So, so companies are not really eager in order to, be compliant to these laws, because they say, hey, I can take my time, and worst case, I would get a $7,500 fine, and I can get away with that. So I think it really differs from geography to geography and from different privacy regulation. But I must say that companies are doing really good, and we see a really nice progress. And companies understand that privacy is a brand necessity and not just a compliance. They wanted to show their customers that they care about their privacy, which really elevates their brand trust and loyalty.
Yeah, I would actually just say that I don't think it's so much that companies are saying, it's a fine. We don't, I mean, we're just going to pay the fine and not be compliant. I do think a lot of this is that systems that are engineered. So, with GDPR, many companies have automated systems in place now to be able to comply with those requests. What I think is happening when you have new regulatory obligations is that those become one-off compliance exercises where you have like an engineer who goes and pulls the data to be compliant with the request until they get systems that come online. And that's where a lot of the business opportunity has been, is developing these compliance tools that automate the process for companies so that it isn't a one-off exercise. You'd be surprised how many very sophisticated companies are still doing GDPR requests in a one-off kind of a way, but because simply, to be honest, those requests don't actually happen that frequently. It takes a very motivated customer to make that kind of a request. And so many companies have, other engineering priorities. So they say, we'll just do this in a one-off way for as long as we can get away with it until we can't any longer. And I did see a question come in over the chat, which is also just to say that many companies are not going to be, if you make a request for data, we're not going to be saying, well, you live in a jurisdiction where we don't have to comply with that. Because once you've built the tools to be able to do it, it's actually quite simple to do it for all of your customers. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why very large tech companies have said, okay, just bring GDPR globally because we're already complying with it everywhere. I think there are going to be very different compliance cost scenarios for small to mid-sized businesses than there are for the really big companies that have already invested in these tools that allow them to be compliant. So that's just another sort of complexity to the whole.
I actually see a different problem here, which is my experience has been that a lot of companies don't even know what data they have. Everything is so siloed that they actually they physically cannot. It's not that they don't want to, it's that they literally, don't even know where to begin. So they know that, X department has one thing on me, but who else has what, where is it sitting? And I think that's one of the main challenges with compliance. I mean, a good friend of mine who works for a global bank unnamed told me that they have 50 people working on this very one issue, which sounded like insane to me when I'm like, this is a global operation. Like you would think that everything is set up, but I mean, if they can't get it right, then I don't even know about this, the smaller or mid-size company. And by the way, I mean, again, like back from my security and biometrics perspective, this is exactly, what fraudsters and hackers are exploiting, because they know that this information is sitting and people don't exactly know where it is. So from a breach, this is exactly what they're latching onto.
Well, I had actually had somebody suggest to me once, that this was an opportune time to introduce blockchain, because if you could sort of radioisotope data Because the problem with data is that it's digital and it's easy to replicate. And within an organization, you may have great controls on what goes in or outside of your company, but you might not have great controls over how it moves within your own corporate walls. And so wouldn't it be great if you could use blockchain to trace sort of how data gets replicated and where it gets used, so that when somebody says, I want it back, you could just pull it all back. And I just said, I don't know that that would be a green energy kind of thing to do, but it's an interesting, like that's the interesting problem to solve, is how do you create a mechanism to be able to basically take all those data tendrils and pull them back when you need to. And that is, I think, the big compliance challenge.
So this is actually exactly, you just kind of like teed up like exactly this company that I'm forming called Anonymous. That's exactly what we're doing, but not blockchain. Because with you can't do biometrics on the blockchain. It actually doesn't work for authentication and real-time matching. It just takes too long. So the blockchain is absolutely, aligned with the push towards decentralization of information, and then like figuring out, how to not have everything together. But the caveat is that you can't do everything on the blockchain. And so we need other frameworks for decentralization.
And for those of you who are investors, another Israeli startup, which I think now hit unicorn status of $1 billion valuation, is a company called Big ID, which will go find all your data for you by roaming through your systems, and then using some machine learning tools to analyze and categorize and actually tell you what you have and where it is and that sort of thing. I remember years ago, maybe 20 years ago, when I was at AOL, and I first realized, hey, I kind of need an inventory of where all the data is. No big deal. We have a CIO, we have a CTO, we have all these senior people who seem to be the right people who would know where all our data is. Certainly our chief security officer would know where it is, right? No, the chief security officer knew the kinds of things he had to know, which didn't necessarily mean which databases have particular categories of data. And the IT folks knew their piece. And it turned out that nobody actually knew, because the marketing people were allowed to sign a deal with a vendor who would set up another database that had part of their database to do some unique kind of sorting or, data appending. And if you're a company of any size, even a smaller company, next thing you know, you turn around and there's hundreds of systems that are all the right thing, that everybody wants to use this vendor or this technology because that works well, for them. And so, surprise, surprise, some of the chief privacy officers are becoming chief data officers, because it turns out that the regulatory pressure has forced them to actually figure out, where is all the data? What is it? What rights do we have to use it, so that we actually can comply with law? And guess what? That's actually a pretty decent business need to actually understand, the full scope of your data and how it uses. So, and you've kind of gone up the corporate ladder with, privacy and trust. Do you see, we have a couple of friends, the chief privacy officer of MasterCard is now their chief data officer. We see a few companies. Is this the trend, that the privacy people who kind of, we've been kind of like the expensive legal compliance risk people, we tell you can't do stuff. Are we, because of the importance, becoming sort of strategic revenue people who actually help companies make money instead of tell them they can't do stuff?
Well, it's better to be a profit center than a cost center, right? At any company. But I mean, to your point, actually, the very first data audit I ever did, the most common response back to the question, where are you storing data? The answer was, under my desk. That was the most common response back before we had, AWS and cloud infrastructure. But I think I wouldn't say it's necessarily a trend that your chief privacy officer is becoming your chief data officer. It may be that the two of those things coming together is actually, for some companies, particularly highly regulated organizations, probably a really good thing. Because I looked at my role as not being, a blocker, but an enabler. And very often there are two ways to proverbially skin a cat. You can do it in a way that is not going to be privacy friendly, or you can do it. It's often not that much more costly to do it in a way that is privacy and security aware. So if you can do that, unlock the value, your company will be better off. And it's good to have a person, I think, who's looking at both sides of that coin and thinking about, how can we how can we achieve maximum value for the data, and not just for the company, but for the customer, but also do it in a way that will protect the data to the greatest extent. And that sometimes you're right on the razor edge there. So I think that having those, if not in one person, to have a very tight reciprocal relationship with the people who operate in those functional areas, I think is going to be very important for success.
Oh, let's take a detour to Israel locally for a minute. You mentioned at the beginning of the call, you just had your second vaccine. We all looked at you jealously and have been remarking at how well and quickly Israel has rolled out the vaccination. Part of this arrangement, obviously, is due to the deal that the government made with Pfizer to help accelerate priority access, with some commitment to de-identified, but a commitment to providing data about how it was working, and some local privacy organizations in Israel worried that, wait, what's going on here? Are we selling our privacy for the vaccine? Hey, maybe that's a good deal, but we don't really know what's going on here. And then the second thing that happened that kind of raised privacy interest about Israel and COVID was, in addition to creating an app that you can download, like Apple and Google have supported in the US, where you can be notified if somebody has been in your proximity. So Israel's got an app like that. But the Shabak, the surveillance, the FBI, the Mossad, rolled out a program that enables the tracking of phones in the same way that may be used for terrorism or for real security threats, probably the kind of thing 8,200 folks have been involved with over the years, but applying it to sending you a message saying, hey, stay home, go into quarantine at the threat of penalty, because the alert, the system has indicated that your phone was near the phone of somebody who was diagnosed with COVID. And this, I think, was very controversial because of the leverage of this sort of, surveillance system. What's been the reaction on the ground, and as somebody involved in privacy and technology, how have you followed these issues?
Okay, great. So I must say that just to note, mine and myself, we're not here to go against companies. This is not our mission. We're here to work to bridge the gap between consumers to companies. Now, in terms of your question, I think that this is a really good example where giving our health data for the greater good is something that would, this is again, the cost versus value. This is where the value is greater than the cost exponentially, right? So, but in terms of your question, I think that you probably, all of you heard the phrase, I have nothing to hide, right? When you speak with people about privacy, they say, hey, I have nothing to hide, I don't care, right? But in this case, this is a really, so let me bring the question back to you. If you have nothing to hide, if this is the phrase of most of the people, why do you care that the Shabak or the Mossad would use that technology to help cut infections chains, right? If that's the most effective way to do that, if that's the most effective way of cutting these infection change, why not using that? If you have nothing to hide, why would you care of letting the government use that in a responsible way to help, save lives?
Well, because we all have something to hide, number one. Maybe my phone is, at my neighbor's house a little bit too often, or in Korea, where something similar happened, people who frequented gay nightclubs had their information, exposed in a way that really caused some harm to them. Or just the Orwellian feeling that somebody is watching, somebody is monitoring, has a real chilling effect. So I think we all have something to hide. I guess the question is there a fair balance? We understand that if I have COVID, I can't say nobody should know. If I was in a space where maybe I've, been close to people, right? I'm obligated. the government is obligated to share this information. But I think we want to know that there's controls, there's oversight, there's process.
Definitely.
The spies not spying on his mother-in-law or his ex-girlfriend, or that the data is being deleted. Yeah, I think it's all about a balance of rights and protections. Very true. Francis, go ahead.
I actually, Jules, I think it goes back to the snooper bowl thing. It's like when people don't know, they start making things up, or like, you know, Anne, what you were saying about, you know, people really thinking that, like, I thought about Nike sneakers and all of a sudden, you know, it's like people really, and I experienced this myself. I mean, people really believe that government, companies, or whatever can do much more than they actually can or want to. And part of it is the transparency of what is being collected, what is, you know, how the data is being used, who it's being shared with. And, you know, this goes back to these code of conducts and these guidelines that, you know, we put together, because at the time, you know, we're like, this technology is never going to be accepted widely if we don't like just put it out there and be honest with what's actually happening. And I think you can take that to any, you know, to any other aspect.
I also just think there's wide variation in the degree of trust in governments around the world. You go to the Nordics, very high. You come to the United States, perhaps with good reason, very low. You know, it's variable. And so what people are willing to allow their governments to know about them, whether it's their health data, financial data, anything else, it's going to be widely variable.
Yeah, and all I'm saying is that if they use it responsibly to help save my mother or my grandmother, I'm in favor, right? In that specific case. So this is all I'm saying.
Questions from anybody in the room for any of our speakers, either on the Bible story or any of the privacy items or tidbits that you heard here. All right. If not, I'm going to turn over to Aliza. Anne, thank you for joining us. Gal, great to see you. Francis, thanks so much. Really appreciated a chance to catch up with you all, and hopefully useful and interesting for all of you who listened along or had a question or two to ask. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks for the invitation. Jake, Lisa, over to you.
Thank you so much. This was so fascinating and funny. I found myself laughing at different points. It was just so entertaining. And so that was not the focus, but so engaging and easy to understand for somebody like myself who is clearly not in data or securities or anything like that. And clearly I need a little bit of security because my child is about to run into the room. But it was really great to listen to all of you. Thank you so much. And it certainly leaves us all thinking about our own data. And I saw Ezra Kapitansky has already joined mine, as he put into the chat. And I certainly think that there's a lot for all of us to think about. And I do think that the question about how does Nike know that I was talking about it is something that is on people's minds all the time. Certainly I see it, you know, when talking about a baby product, all of a sudden it's in my email. So it's really interesting, and it's really interesting to see.
Here's the quick answer.
Yes.
You actually don't notice all these other ads that you're getting all the time. You just noticed that Nike one because you were just talking about it. But the reality is you get Nike ads all the time and you just don't even pay attention to them. It's great coincidence. Although who knows, maybe there is some company doing something sneaky, but Anne tells us it's not happening at Amazon. I'm pretty sure it's not happening at least, you know, Amazon or those guys. They got plenty of other data to sell about you. There you go.
It's good to know, and it definitely puts me at ease. So thank you very much. And I just again want to thank our speakers, Francis, Gal, Anne, and of course Jules as our moderator. It was really fantastic having all of you. Jules, it's wonderful having you as an alum of Yeshiva University. It gives us a lot of nachas, and you should use your Dvar Torah and words of wisdom for many more speeches. And Anne will, I guess, eventually hit you up for that $1. So thank you all so much for joining us. Happy Purim to everybody who is celebrating, and for anyone interested in getting involved in any alumni programming or mentoring students. We certainly have students who are going into securities and data. We have amazing new degrees through the CAT School. If anybody's interested in mentoring our students, please be in touch. You can email us at alumni@yu.edu. Again, my name is Aliza Abrams-Koenig. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement for the university, and we really appreciate everyone joining us today. Have a great day and happy Purim.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.